thank you so much for clicking on to my channel. This is my first video and I'm very excited to start this journey. I appreciate all of the support that I've received thus far, and I look forward to the future of this channel. And I want to just go ahead and give a moment to say why I'm doing this. True crime is something that I have always been passionate about. It is something that I want to pursue career-wise, and I just wanted to do something in my free time that I could use as a creative outlet that also ties in the true crime aspect. I do want to go ahead and film a disclaimer before we begin. I am going to go into detail about the events that happened, but I don't feel like it's necessary for me to go into detail about the violence that took place within the incidents that happened. Anytime we're talking about violent criminal acts, it is a bit hard to get through. I've researched this case for hours and hours. I have watched all of the entire 17 days worth of trial film that was released, and it is not an easy case to hear. I want to go ahead and jump on in because this is a very long case. If you are looking for a short, sweet, and to the point video, this is not that. This is going to be a very detailed and thorough case study. It is not for those who have trouble listening to gruesome details. Unfortunately, this case is full of those. So I'm going to keep it pretty mild. I don't feel like there has to be a lot of details about the crime scene or the exact acts that happened to this victim, because it was so much more than a victim, and I want her to be remembered by the things that she loved and what she wanted to be and who she wanted to be. I want her to be remembered as the beautiful nursing student who was looking forward to her future with her boyfriend and who loved to sing and was very silly. I don't want her to be remembered by the gruesome details of her ultimate end. I also want to give a disclaimer saying that nothing that I say is in any way intended to bring any harm to the victim's family and friends or community. I do not mean any harm to them. This is just simply information that I found online and compiled and gathered in to make a video where I am informing the audience of a case that has happened. So let's get started discussing the tragic and very bizarre case of Holly Lynn Bobo. Holly Lynn Bobo was born on October 12, 1990, to parents Dana and Karen Bobo. She was born and raised in a small town called Darden, Tennessee. The home in which she grew up in and lived in was actually built by her family. She lived in that home with her parents, an older brother named Clint, and their family dog. Holly loved being outside. She loved four-wheelers and she loved spending time with her family. Her mom actually said that they were so close that they could finish each other's sentences and they were always thinking about the same things. Holly also affected her community positively. She was very involved in her church, Corinth Baptist, where she sang in the choir. Whitney Duncan, a popular country singer, is actually Holly's cousin. Oftentimes, she would come over anytime Holly was practicing for a performance and she wanted some advice or wanted some help. She loved to entertain, but she also loved to help out any way she could. She was an upstanding citizen and a good role model for the younger children. She knew school was important too, and she excelled and had one of the highest GPAs in her high school graduating class. Holly was actually a nursing student at UT Martin in Tennessee. She took her grades very seriously. Her mom joked, saying every test for Holly was a big test. She was always studying. Fellow students of Holly's said that she hardly ever missed class. Holly had planned a bright future for herself. She wanted to be a caregiver. She was in a relationship with boyfriend Drew Scott. He had just given her a promise ring, and she was very excited about their future together. Holly was described as someone with a contagious love and was also a genuinely kind person. Quote, "Knowing Holly has made me a better person. She loved everyone. She saw the best in people and was a friend to all. She showed genuine love to her friends and even to strangers. She taught everyone to laugh and have fun. She was not afraid to sing and dance. Those are qualities that came easily to her, and seeing the way she could light up a room with them made me want to work on improving those qualities within myself." End quote. Quote, "She was always nice and a paradigm of human kindness." End quote. A lot of people said Holly had that same bright personality as a child. Quote, "Holly was the type of person that could light up the room with one smile. She was always super sweet even when we were younger." End quote. She was described as being funny and lively. She could randomly burst into song and make silly faces at you. It's easy to say that the community really, really loved Holly, which is one of the many reasons that April 13th, 2011 was such a tragic, unsettling, and confusing time for the community. That would be the last time Holly Bobo was ever seen alive. I contemplated where I wanted to start when it came to this case because it is a very, very confusing case. There are a lot of moving parts to this case. There are a lot of characters that are talked about within this story. This case is completely circumstantial evidence. There's not a lot of forensics evidence, if any, that they are able to link to these perpetrators, so it is all circumstantial. I want to go ahead and talk about the days leading up to April the 13th, 2011. Holly and her friend went on a double date to a festival called a coon hunt. I don't know a lot about this coon hunt other than the fact that a lot of the people in the town are involved. This is a very, very small town. I'm talking population 2,500. It is very small. So everybody kind of knows everyone in this town. So they go to this coon hunt festival, if you will, and while there, they see a man who's walking around, and Holly's friend notices that he is staring at them. And she doesn't know if he is staring at Holly, at herself, or at both of them. It makes her a little uncomfortable. She notices it 3 or 4 times and also notices that he's on his cell phone a lot. Remember that detail because that will become very important information later on. Several days leading up to April the 13th, Holly and her friend Jill were practicing some songs that they were going to sing for Jill's grandmother's funeral. She had just passed away. Holly was a very reliable person. She was there for her friends when they needed her, and she was incredibly intelligent. She studied for her nursing exams all the time. She was constantly studying. She'd been studying with some friends as well as practicing these songs that they were going to sing for Jill's grandmother's funeral. So needless to say, Holly had a lot on her plate, but she was very much focusing in on one test that she had April the 13th. So now I want to talk about the morning of April the 13th. The morning of April the 13th, Holly was up at 4:30 a.m. studying for an exam. Her father, who worked at Mackenzie Tree Services, came by her room because he saw that she was awake, the light was on, and he offered her money. He said he did this occasionally during the week to, in case she wanted some snacks or to stop and get gas. There was a convenience store along the way to school, so he did this often. He said that she was acting totally normal and she was dressed and ready for the day. We know nothing more until 7 a.m. That's when Karen, Holly's mother, who worked at Scotts Hill Elementary School, saw Holly at the table studying and said that, again, she was acting completely normal. She was dressed and ready for the day. So Karen fixed Holly some breakfast and put it in the microwave for her and went ahead and packed Holly's lunch and left for work. She said that, again, Holly was acting completely normal and nothing was out of the ordinary. Now, around that time, it is alleged that Holly was on the phone with her friend, Hannah. Hannah was a fellow nursing student who was friends with Holly from high school, but because of going through the program together, they had become even closer friends, and they often studied together. So Holly allegedly was on the phone with Hannah. I've seen reports that contradict this, but overall, most people say that Holly indeed was on the phone with Hannah. Now, we do know that she was texting back and forth with Hannah and some other students, but we're not sure if she was on the phone, but it is alleged that she was. Around 7, she told Hannah that she had just gotten breakfast, she was gonna eat it, and be heading towards school. Holly usually left for school around 7:40, 7:45, so she could make it there by 7:55. The school was just about 6 miles away, about a 15-minute drive. Around this time, Holly's boyfriend, whose name was Drew, was across the county hunting on Holly's grandmother's property. It was the beginning of turkey season. He was there with his father and he was hunting. Well, while he was hunting, a family member of the Bobos approached him and told him he would need a permit to hunt there. I did not recognize him as Holly's boyfriend. So once he explained who he was, the situation cleared up, but he wanted to call Holly and let her know of the situation. At that time, he calls Karen, Holly's mother, which again will come up. It's very important that you remember that. He calls Karen and he calls Holly and discusses the situation with Holly. It's important to note that the only people in the home at the time are Holly, her older brother Clint, who is upstairs asleep, and their family dog, Champ. Close to 7:30, Holly is getting ready to leave for the day and Clint is still asleep. This is around the time that things start to get weird. The Bobo family's neighbor is outside on his way to his construction job wherein he hears screaming. And the screaming that he hears, he believes came from the direction of the Bobo home. It was a female voice saying, "Stop it, stop it." He goes inside and tells his mother that she needs to contact the Bobo family and make sure that everything is okay. He heads on to work. At this time, the mother of the neighbor who heard the screams calls Karen's cell phone. She does not answer. She then calls the school which Karen works at and leaves a message with the secretary letting her know what is going on about the screams and asking Karen to call her back. So the timeline now is going to get a little confusing because things start overlapping. So really buckle in and pay attention to this part. I'm gonna recap it afterwards, but just try to stay with me. So Karen receives the message from the school secretary and becomes concerned. At the same time that that's happening, the family dog, Champ, wakes Clint up hysterically barking. As that's happening, Karen calls 911. And when she calls 911, because of being in the county that she's in, and it's not the same county that she lives in, they routed her to the wrong dispatch. So she hangs up in frustration and calls Clint. So this is Clint's statement, kind of told in my own words. Clint initially states that he receives a call from his mother asking where Holly is and says he looked out the window and saw Holly and who he assumed was Holly's boyfriend. It was a male wearing camouflage. The male wearing camouflage and Holly were kneeling down in front of each other. Clint states that Holly was clearly emotional and was saying no, why. The conversation was mostly the male talking and Clint could not make out what he was saying. He states that he assumed they were breaking up and did not want to intrude on such a private moment. Now, it is also alleged that at the time, Drew and Clint were really good friends. So I can see where he would not want to bust up in the middle of his sister and his best friend who were dating their breakup. I bet that would be really awkward. Holly's mom then informs Clint that Holly has an exam that day and she should be on her way to school. Holly's mom then gets frustrated and hangs up the phone. Karen Bobo then calls Clint again. Clint lets her know that Holly is outside talking to Drew. She then says, "That's not Drew, get a gun and shoot him." Now remember, Karen knew that Drew was across the county turkey hunting. He had called her to let her know of the family member, approaching him. So Karen knew that that was not Drew. Clint states that he then said, "You want me to shoot Drew?" Karen hangs up in frustration. This is when Karen calls 911, hysterically telling them that someone was taking her daughter. She makes 2 911 calls. The first one goes to dispatch, and then the second one, this time, goes to the correct dispatch. So at this point, officers are on the way to the Bobo home. As Clint gets off the phone with his mother, he looks out the window and sees a man in camo walking with Holly to the woods. Now, it is stated that the man was not dragging Holly, because a news station initially reported that, and that's not true. The man was walking, he was holding Holly's right arm and was walking with her, but Clint stated that there was no fight involved. It was very much just casually walking towards the woods. Now, we don't know for a fact, but someone could have been holding a gun up to her arm or, threatened her. So although he states there was no fight, just remember we don't know exactly what happened. Clint also later on states that he noticed that the male that was walking with Holly was holding a black item in his hand. It is not ever stated if it's a gun. It's just that's kind of what they want the public to believe by the way they worded it, but we don't know if that's true. Clint says that the man is 5'8" to 6 foot tall. He was not sure exactly how tall. He also states that he was about 200 pounds. Clint also states that the man was wearing non-insulating camo. I also want to add in here that although Drew was wearing camo, Clint stated that he no longer at this point thought it was Drew due to the man's size and stature. He said that it did not fit Drew's description, along with his mom kind of explaining to him that Drew had been hunting and the size. He decides to go ahead and get a loaded pistol per his mother's request and walk outside to kind of further investigate what's going on. At this point, he goes outside. When he gets outside, he notices that there's a small puddle of blood, which he described as about 60 drops, next to Holly's 2006 Ford Mustang that is black. Clint then states that he was going to go towards the woods when the neighbor's mother, who initially made the phone call to Karen Bobo, pulled into their driveway. At this time, the neighbor's mother states, "Hey, my son heard screams about 15 to 20 minutes ago." And I would like to also make note saying Clint never heard these screams. He later on states that what woke him up was their dog Champ barking. Clint goes ahead and pulls out his phone and calls 911. At this point, 911 has been called 3 times. The time is now 8 a.m. and while Clint is on the phone, it is reported that he heard sirens coming. So it didn't take too incredibly long for the police to get there. Thankfully, due to Karen's phone call that she was able to get through about 5 or so minutes previous to Clint making his phone call. So the police officer showed up about 10 minutes after Holly was seen walking towards the woods. At this time, Clint goes ahead and gives the police officer a description of his sister. He states that she's 20 years old, 5'3", and weighs about 110 pounds. She has blonde hair and blue eyes. It's at this point that the police get there. They take a statement from both the neighbor and from Clint, and they start looking around the property. Now, it is unclear whether or not they immediately went into the woods. I've seen articles that state both they did and they did not. So I'm going off of the court records that I read, in which stated they just took a report from Clint and the neighbor. Now, at this time, they unfortunately trampled around the crime scene. They were looking for clues and for evidence, and they unfortunately kind of walked all over the ground in which Holly was taken and around the carport in which the perpetrator and Holly were sitting in. At this point, Karen gets home. She doesn't work too far from where she lives. So she arrives home and Holly's father, Dana, is on his way home, but he had about a 30-minute drive. So once Karen gets there, she begs the police to release an Amber Alert, which they would not do due to the fact that Holly is over the age of 17. Karen then lies and tells police that Holly was 17, just so they would do an Amber Alert, which they knew that she was lying and they never did one. Later on, she states that she doesn't regret it and she would have done it all over again. She also begs the police to please put up roadblocks or something to stop cars and look in cars, to which they do not do. No, I'm not shaming the police. I don't want anyone to feel like I am giving a false opinion of the police. I'm not doing that. All I'm stating is fact. And the facts are the police did not set up roadblocks. They trampled all over the crime scene. I am in no way shaming any police force that was involved. I think that they did an incredible job within the realm of what was going on. I think it was probably not a typical case that they got often. Being a city with less than 3,000 people in it, I can't imagine that they have an abduction that happens, daily. I imagine it was new for them. If it had happened before, it may have been a long time. I tried to research and find how often, these kinds of cases happen, and it was hard to find. So I don't believe they had this kind of thing happen very often. I do, however, wish they would have done a little bit of a better job preserving the crime scene, because like I said earlier, with them coming in and trampling along some of the possible footprints and all over the DNA that could have been found around Holly's Mustang. And, I just wish that they had have done a little bit of a better job preserving it. But that is in no way shaming them. So that was what happened that day. So I'm going to go ahead and recap the timeline just so we can get a little bit of a better idea and kind of see it in order without all of the details, so you can kind of get a timeline of what was going on. Because although this feels like it lasted over a long period of time, that's only 30 minutes, so a lot happened in a very short amount of time.
At 4:30 a.m., Holly wakes up to study for her nursing exam. Her dad sees her as he is leaving for work. Around 7 a.m., Holly's mother leaves for work and sees Holly studying. Holly also is texting another nursing student at this point. At 7:30 a.m., Holly's boyfriend, Drew Scott, who had been turkey hunting on Holly's grandmother's property that morning, called her to let her know that a relative of the Bobo family had witnessed him hunting on the property but did not recognize him. This relative had then confronted Drew about needing permission to hunt there. Drew had to explain who he was and what he was doing. Afterwards, he made the phone call to Holly to notify her of the situation. At 7:40 a.m., a close neighbor of the Bobos walks out to his home to go to his construction job when he hears a scream from the Bobos' home and tells his mother about it, and then goes on to work. At 7:45 a.m., the neighbor's mother calls Karen Bobo at work and tells the secretary to please relay the message about the scream. This is also the time Holly Bobo usually would leave for school to arrive at 7:55 a.m. At 7:50 a.m., the family's dog wakes Clint Bobo up while barking. He notices his sister's car still in the driveway and calls his mother's cell phone. His mother does not have the phone with her but receives the message from the school secretary, phones home, and talks to her son, who tells her that Holly Bobo's car is still there. At 7:55 a.m., Karen Bobo calls 911 from school. Unfortunately, she reaches the wrong county emergencies dispatcher. Clint Bobo looks out the window and sees a man dressed in camouflage walking with his sister towards the woods. Clint Bobo calls his sister's phone and gets her voicemail. He also calls Drew, her boyfriend's phone, and gets his voicemail as well. Karen Bobo calls her house again a little before 8 a.m. Her son tells her that he saw Holly and her boyfriend walking towards the woods. Karen Bobo tells him, quote, "That's not her boyfriend. Shoot him." She also tells him to call 911. At 8 a.m., Clint Bobo gets a loaded pistol at his mother's request and walks out the back doors through an open garage attached to the house. He sees a puddle of blood near his sister's car. It's about 60 drops. His neighbor's mother, the one who made the call to the school, pulls up to the driveway to say screams were heard 15 or 20 minutes ago. Clint Bobo then calls 911. A little before 8:10 a.m., the first deputy from Decatur County arrives at the house. Authorities come to believe that Holly Bobo was abducted as she tried to get in her car to drive to nursing school. She is never seen again.
Now I want to go ahead and address something. Clint Bobo, although many people think he did a bad job, I just want to say that we don't know what we would have done in that situation. A lot of people are quick to say, oh, well, he should have went out there, immediately. And especially, I'm from the South, so I can relate to people saying like, oh, get a gun and go out there and shoot him yourself. That's a very common thing, in the South. However, I feel like I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and just say, he could have just woken up. I'm sure his mother, when she called, was incredibly frantic and probably, took him by surprise. And he woke up, he heard the dog barking, and everything happened so quickly. I'm sure that he was confused. Just like when the mother called and said, go out there and shoot him. And he said, you want me to shoot Drew? I'm sure he was just confused and, unsure of what was happening. Again, this is all alleged. I cannot say one way or the other. I want to keep this very factual and keep my opinion kind of out of it. I want to form a storyline that is factual. Since we've established what happened that day, let's go over the crime scene evidence that they gathered. So the day of April the 13th, 2011, the day that Holly disappeared, the only evidence that was found was obviously the puddle of blood that they gathered next to Holly's vehicle. And they also found a print of a croc, like the popular, they used to be popular and now they've kind of resurfaced. The croc, they found a print of that. However, they eventually ruled that out because of Clint's description of what the abductor was wearing, and then Holly's mother, of course, knowing what Holly was wearing that day, they ruled that out. They think that just was maybe one of the footprints of someone who came to search, because the town, did provide a lot of people to come and search, which we will get, more into that as time goes on throughout this case. But let's stick to the evidence right now. Along with the puddle of blood and the shoe print that they eventually ruled out, they also found a spilled drink in the driveway. Now, I researched to see, was this like a canned drink that was knocked over, a bottled drink, a cup, and I couldn't find a lot of detail about it other than the fact that a drink was spilled in the driveway. Now, I'm assuming because Holly had breakfast and lunch for that day, that she, like a lot of us, just took her maybe like a Yeti cup or something with her for the day, and it spilled out. I'm not exactly sure what type of drink it was, but we do know that a drink was found spilled over in the driveway. The police did bring in dogs to sniff and see if they could find any kind of scent or a trail, and they did find where the dogs sniffed to the edge of the woods, and then kind of slightly behind the wooded area there's a place for vehicles. I don't know if this is like a car park or just a dirt mound where people pull their vehicles into. Again, it's kind of hard to find that information out. I've looked everywhere, and all I could say is that the vehicle was parked there. And so that led police to believe that Holly was led to the woods and then eventually got into a vehicle, whether it was on her own free will or due to a threat or forcefully put into a vehicle. We do not know. Again, there were no solid footprints or anything leading to the woods other than the one croc footprint that they ruled out. I think it's important to note at this time that Holly's belongings were with her at the time of the abduction. She took her belongings with her. So she, from what the police believe, they believe that she had taken a lunchbox, a purse, and a notebook with her. And she also had a cell phone, and whether that cell phone was in her bag, in her hand, in a pocket, we do not know, but we do know that the cell phone was with her. So let's talk a little bit more about the cell phone. So whether we believe the abductor made the mistake of allowing Holly to keep her phone on her, whether she had it and he or she, the abductor, whoever they were, whether they did not know, we have no idea. But we do know that Holly had her cell phone with her during the abduction. Now, police have not released the cell phone records saying this is where her phone pinged, this is where her phone pinged. Those records were not released. The only records that the police have cleared up were Holly's boyfriend's records. Remember, Drew Scott, he was across county hunting, which we were going to get more into people of interest and suspects here in a moment, so we won't go over that right now, but that's the only cell phone record that they released. However, Holly's family hired a private investigator team called Without Warning. Now, we will get more into Without Warning in the second video, because this is probably going to be a two-part video because of how long and detailed this study, quote-unquote study, is. I want to make sure I am very detailed about it, so therefore the second video will probably be more related to the trial and kind of the aftermath of everything, and this video will be more about the story of what happened, obviously, and the suspects, because the suspect list is quite long. So Without Warning, just to give you a briefing, it was founded by a woman who had a best friend who was murdered, and the police looked into that murder, and the friend felt as though they weren't doing enough, and so she became a private investigator and eventually solved her own friend's murder. Now, she formed a group called Without Warning, and what they do is they go onto cases and they help find evidence and help clear things up. So Without Warning released Holly's cell phone ping information. However, since it's not from a police report or any kind of forensic technology or anything like that, take it for what you will. But Holly's cell phones pinged, allegedly, around the property in the woods, and then pinged later as if she went into a vehicle and circled around and came back to that area. Now, again, this is not the police's findings. This is the private investigative group called Without Warning's findings. And the family, the Bobo family, released that information to the public. Again, it is not police verified, so I do not want to say it is certain, but it is, from a private investigative point. The following days after April the 13th, Holly's cell phone was found. It was found on the side of the road, kind of on the highway located next to the woods in which she walked into. The cell phone was laying on the ground. Now, they, as in the police department, found that was very bizarre, because the cell phone was not thrown like it would have been thrown out of a window. It was just placed on the ground. The SIM card was found across the highway on the ground, like opposite of sides of the highway. So the cell phone was here, the SIM card was here. Now, it appeared as if it was thrown. However, the cell phone appeared as it was not broken, it was just laying on the ground. And as for evidence, no more evidence is found until 2013. So a whole 2 years later is when the next piece of evidence was found. Now, what was found was what the law enforcement officials believed to be Holly's purse. And they showed a photo of that purse to Karen, Holly's mother, and she said, yes, that is Holly's purse. So they retrieved it and gave it to Karen, or they didn't give it to her, but they showed it to her in person the following day, and she recanted that statement. She said, never mind, I don't think this is Holly's. Now, a lot of people say, it was 2 years later, I'm sure the purse faded, it probably was destroyed considering they found it outside in the woods. However, personally, if she and her mom were as close as, Karen says they were, she probably knows if it was Holly's bag. I know personally, my mom and I share purses and, trade purses. So my mom would know if a purse was mine or not. She's pretty much aware of all of the bags that I have. I want to add in at this time, the law enforcement invited in the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. So they were there, the TBI is what I will refer to them as. They were there helping local law enforcement with this case. TBI, along with the law enforcement, eventually released a statement saying that the Holly Bobo case was the most exhausting and the most expensive case in Tennessee history. In 2011, there was an $85,000 reward for any information that would lead to the arrest of the perpetrator or lead to Holly. In 2012, a $250,000 reward and a $85,000 reward that would be given if an arrest was made or if a conviction happened. And in 2013, a person who lived in Tennessee came forward and said, look, to the person out there who did this, if you will turn yourself in, an arrest is made, I will give you $25,000, which I thought was kind of a bizarre tactic, but that person was giving away their money in hopes of Holly returning home or closure for the family. So I think they had a good heart, but I had just never heard of that tactic before. So now I want to talk a little bit about the people of interest. Keep in mind, these are different from the suspects. These are not people who were considered potentially to be the abductor. Well, they were in a way, but they were immediately released. So one suspect that we all kind of have in mind, right now is Holly's brother, Clint. And when I was reading this story and when I was researching it, I was confused by Clint's behavior the day of Holly's disappearance. I personally would like to say that if it were my brother and I was being taken into the woods by even if he thought it was somebody that I knew, I would like to think my brother would at least kind of pop his head outside and be like, hey, is everything okay? If I was crying or upset. But none of us can say what we would do unless we were in that situation. So I would like to think, yeah, I would totally go out there and yell and find out what's going on, but I can't say that for sure. And, unless I was in that circumstance. Now, Holly's brother was questioned by the police for 17 hours. He offered up his cell phone and his hard drive, to which they tested, and they cleared and said they didn't find anything. And Clint and the family say that he was strip searched. However, the TBI has come out to say that's not true. He did also take a polygraph, and it was hard to find, but allegedly he passed the polygraph. But again, I couldn't find a definite answer just due to the fact of people who were saying one thing and then people who were saying something else. So allegedly he passed a polygraph. So although Clint was cleared by the police department, when you go online to research this case, especially like forums and things on Reddit and such, Clint is very much a person of interest in people's eyes. They believe that he's behaved suspiciously, so he is a person of interest in society's eyes. Now whether you think he's guilty of something, that's completely up to you. Next person who a lot of people felt like should have been questioned was Holly's boyfriend. He was wearing camo. Clint did think it was him, so people thought that, Drew should be questioned. Now, Drew was cleared almost immediately. His cell phone pings showed that he was, in fact, where he said he was. He had an alibi, and his father and one of Holly's relatives came forward and said, I saw him along with Karen and Holly both talking to him that morning. So he was cleared. Both families say that Holly and Drew had an amazing relationship. He had just given her a promise ring. They were very excited about the start of their future together, and he was really beat up about this whole situation. His grandmother stated that the night of April the 13th, was the first night that he had not spent with Holly in almost a year. Also, after he went turkey hunting, he immediately went to work, and they, cleared that alibi as well and said that it checked out. So overall, although he was wearing camouflage, Clint did say he did not match the physical appearance of the abductor, and I think it's pretty safe to say that he was not the abductor. Factually, he checked out. Now, the next person of interest we're going to talk about is Holly's ex-boyfriend. So not Drew, but her ex-boyfriend. Holly and her ex-boyfriend did not have an amicable breakup. Her family and friends say it was a very, very bad breakup. In fact, Holly had a restraining order against him. You know, I think it's safe to say that Karen probably assumed that whenever Holly was being led into the woods, that it possibly was her ex-boyfriend. You know, she had a really bad relationship with him, and Karen did tell Clint to shoot him. No, I could not find anywhere really where he was questioned. However, he was eventually arrested for kidnapping, but it was a completely unrelated case. And the last person of interest I want to talk about is a member of the community by the name of Terry Britt. Now, Terry Britt was a middle-aged man who was a registered sex offender in that area. He had gone to prison for kidnap in the past, and he basically only kidnapped blonde-haired, blue-eyed, beautiful young women. So Holly was his type. As much as I don't want to say it like that, I mean, it is what it is. So there was a lead detective on this case who interviewed Terry Britt because of the, his rap sheet. He interviewed Terry Britt, and when Terry Britt was talking to the detective, he almost fantasized about how he would have kidnapped Holly. He explained exactly what he would have done in great detail, and later on kind of matched what happened, but we will get more into that eventually, obviously. But he almost was fantasizing about it, and the detective was very, very deeply disturbed. They took cadaver dogs into Terry Britt's home, and there were 2 places in his home where the cadaver dogs started barking or, signaling that they smelled death. And he was really never arrested. He was brought in for questioning, but he was never arrested for this case. Terry Britt has a record that goes on for miles, and things on that record include, but are not limited to, kidnapping, rape charges, assault, and the list goes on and on and on. And, he had an alibi. He said he went to the furniture store in that town and was getting a sofa. So the police went to that store and talked to the owner, and the owner said, no, that never happened. Terry Britt was never charged. The detective that was on this case was adamant that they believed it was Terry Britt. Eventually, that detective was let go from this case because they were zoned in on Terry Britt and Terry Britt only. To this day, that detective swears that they believe that Terry Britt is the one who did this. Unfortunately, there were no breaks in this case until 2014, so 3 years since the abduction. Now, although this case has been pretty confusing thus far, this is where it really takes a turn. So try to focus, because there are going to be a lot of names, and some of them are going to have the same last name or sound like they have the same name. So really focus in at this point. There was a young man by the name of John Dylan Adams, and he went by Dylan Adams. He had been arrested for gun charges that were completely unrelated to the Holly Bobo case. Now, this is where almost no one can find out how or why. The only thing that I can think of is maybe he was trying to cut a deal for his current charges, but for some reason, he told the police that his brother, whose name was Zach Adams, was involved in the Holly Bobo abduction and murder. Now, this is the first time the police had really heard of murder. It had always just been abduction. Well, around that time, somehow, and I do not know how, I cannot find it anywhere, and when I tell you I have researched this case for weeks, I have studied and put so many hours into this. I have watched 17 days worth of trial video. I cannot find anywhere or anyhow why Dylan Adams confessed this, other than maybe trying to attempt to make a plea deal on his unrelated gun charges. Well, another thing I cannot find out is Zach Adams somehow, some way, was trying to relay a message to Dylan, and the police found out. I don't know if this is via letter, phone, person told him. I'm not sure how. But Zach relayed a message, and I'm going to read it so I have it exact. So on March 4th, the message that Zach was trying to get to his brother Dylan in prison said, quote, "Tell my brother that he started this. If he doesn't shut his mouth, he'll be in the hole beside her." Now, once the police had that information, along with the fact that Dylan informed the police of Zach's involvement, they had enough where they felt like they could arrest him, or at least question him. Now, what Dylan told the police was, and this is where, again, I know I've used this word so much, but it really does get so confusing. So basically, Dylan told the police that he was coming home one day, and he went to Zach's. And again, Zach and Dylan did not live together, so Dylan was going over to Zach's home that Zach shared with his grandfather, and he was trying to go inside, and Zach would not let him. Zach said, "Don't come in here. You're not allowed to come in here." And that's whenever he realized that Zach had tied up Holly Bobo and had her, tied up. And that's what he told the police. So between his confession of that, which also in a way was incriminating to him, and he eventually incriminates others as well, which I will get into them in a minute. Right now, let's just focus on the Adams brothers. The police felt like they had enough to look into him. So they go onto his Facebook, and they go to April the 13th, 2011, the day that Holly was kidnapped. And he has a little bit of some suspicious posts on his Facebook from that morning. Again, I'm going to read them because I want to make sure that they are correct and word for word. So this one post was made at 7:30 a.m. and it has a bit of a little foul language in it, so just a warning. He said, "You know you never was, you stupid whore." And that post was made at 7:30 in the morning. And keep in mind, that is around the time that Holly Bobo, the neighbor heard the screaming, was at around 7:30 that morning. Later on that day, the same date, April the 13th, 2011, the police found an even more incriminating post from Zach Adams. And that post read, "Who am I looking for?" And attached to that post was a selfie or a photo of himself, and he was wearing camo. Now, at this time, I'm going to say that Clint did say that he believed the person who abducted Holly was between 5'8" and 6 foot and weighed about 200 pounds. Neither Dylan nor Zach matched this description, so I just want to put that out there. I do want to make a note that Dylan has an incredibly low IQ. A lot of people compare him to Brendan Dassey, if you're familiar with Making a Murderer. He does have a low IQ, so I feel like it is important that I note this, because a lot of people feel like he was making his statement up. And the reason that they believe that is because he later on changes his story. He had told family and friends he went to Zach's house and he saw a blonde girl in the home, not tied up, not struggling, not frantic, who looked like she wanted to be there. And then, of course, he told the police that he gets to the home, Zach wouldn't allow him inside of the house. He was threatening him, leading him to believe that Zach had done something incriminating. He also goes on to tell the police that he was more involved than he originally stated. He said, and I want to make a warning that this is one of the parts that are a little unsettling to hear. So there are several of those in these testimonies. Again, I'm not going into a lot of detail, but I do want to make a statement saying they are a little unsettling. So Dylan tells the police that he had more to do with it than he initially let on. He eventually told the police that they intended to rob Holly Bobo, and instead they ended up raping, murdering, and disposing of her body in the woods. Now, he did not give any more detail. In fact, the police at the time said he didn't give any more detail than anyone who had seen the news would have really given. He told about the kidnapping, but that was already, public information. The only thing that he had mentioned that the police felt was a little different was he mentioned rape and murder, whereas, they didn't know that for sure because they had not found a body. However, he does implicate himself. He says he hid Holly's belongings and got rid of them. So he does implicate himself. Now, I'm going to throw in two additional people. So remember, we have Dylan and Zach Adams, and they are brothers. Dylan also says that Shane Austin and Jason Autry are involved. Now, Shane Austin and Jason Autry are cousins, and they are also really good friends with Zach Adams. And by really good friends, I mean they're all on drugs, they're all on meth and morphine, and they all buy and sell from each other and kind of do drugs together. That's kind of their connection. So let's talk a little bit about Shane Austin. Now, we're going to refer back to a story that I told at the very beginning of this video, but just to refresh your memory, Holly and her friend Candace, a few days before Holly's disappearance, went on a double date to a coon hunt, which is kind of like a festival that they have in their town. Whenever they were there, Holly's friend reports that she saw a man who kept staring at her and Holly, and she was very sketched out. So, once Holly is missing, she reports to the command center of Holly's case and informs them of this situation. 2 months into the investigation, they put her with a sketch artist and he releases a sketch. Now, it is believed, allegedly, that the man in the sketch is Shane Austin. Now, Shane Austin has a large scar on his face and the sketch does not. So I'm going to put a picture up and you can kind of make that judgment yourself if you feel like it is him or not. That's kind of up to you. Really, the only thing that is certain is they both wore glasses. So Shane Austin was arrested. He was brought in for questioning, and due to the suspect circumstances of the coon hunt photo, similarities, and between that and Dylan Adams' statement, they arrested him. So far in custody, we have Dylan Adams on an unrelated gun charge. We have Zach Adams, who was arrested for the potential murder, rape, and kidnapping of Holly Bobo. And we have Shane Austin, who was also arrested for the same possible murder, rape, and disposing of a body, kidnapping, all of that. We also have Jason Autry. Now, Jason Autry is quite the character. Jason Autry was a 40-year-old man who was very much on drugs. He, self-admits that he is a drug addict. In fact, one of his statements, he says, "I am a thief, I am a drug addict, but I'm not a murderer." Now, he gives a very, very, very detailed testimony to the police in agreement of immunity. So he says basically he gets what you call a sweetheart deal, which is essentially he tells the police everything and he possibly gets less time. So he is testifying against Dylan, Zach, and Shane in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and let you know what Jason said. Again, this is pretty disturbing information. So if you are faint or don't like to hear unsettling things, I will put in a timestamp and you can go to that time and skip through this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail just because I don't feel like that's necessary when it comes to the details of what happened to Holly, but I am going to include this because it eventually became the prosecution's kind of star witness. It's kind of what got the prosecution the case that they wanted against the Addams brothers, Shane, and even Jason. Jason Autry said on the morning of April 13th, 2011, the day that Holly Bobo went missing, that morning, Zach Addams called him and asked him for quote-unquote help. Jason said he assumed that Zach needed help because maybe a batch of meth he was making went downhill, something did not work. He said that he thought maybe it, quote, locked up, end quote. He drove over to Shane Austin's house where Dylan, Zach, and Shane were all hanging out. He got to the home and got out of his vehicle. He said that he saw Shane Austin standing outside of a burn barrel and the air smelled like methamphetamine. He said it did not smell like decomposition or death, it just smelled like methamphetamine. He said he immediately went and bought a morphine pill from Zach Addams, went back. His words were he cooked it down and shot it up. He also said that he noticed that Shane Austin had a gun in a holster on his right side. He went into the home and he said that's whenever he saw what appeared to be a body rolled up in a multicolored farm blanket. He said, "Man, I really hate that you killed Joe." Joe was a fellow drug dealer and also had the same baby mama as Zach Addams. And Jason said that Zach and Joe were enemies. Joe apparently owed money to Zach, and so when Jason walked into the home, he saw what he assumed was a body rolled up in a blanket and, said, "Man, I really hate to see that you killed Joe." That is when Zach Addams looked at Jason Autry in the face and said, "That's Holly Bobo." Jason says at that time he was very confused because he did not know who Holly Bobo was. Jason then said that Zach told him, "I need you to help me hide this body." Jason said, "Okay, I'll help you," which, how a person can do that, I do not understand, but that's what Jason did. He said that Dylan Addams was in the home, but he was never really around. He just saw Zach predominantly. That's when Zach picked up Holly Bobo's feet and Jason picked up Holly Bobo's upper torso, all wrapped in the multicolored farm blanket. They took it outside and they put it in the back of Zach's vehicle. Jason said the only way he was going to help Zach is if he could leave his car anywhere but Zach's home. He did not trust his car being around Shane and Dylan. So, with that being said, Jason drove his vehicle to a church that was less than a mile from Zach's home, and Zach followed him with Holly Bobo's body in the back of the vehicle. Jason said at that time they drove around for a little while and decided to go by the Tennessee River underneath a bridge. Now, Jason said that it was his idea to, and again, this is going to be kind of graphic, so I apologize. And again, last warning, this is where it really gets dark. Jason then suggests that they gut Holly Bobo's body and put her in the Tennessee River. Shane thinks that this is a good idea and drives the vehicle to a bridge where he had been before. And they get out of the vehicle, and as they are moving Holly Bobo's body out of the trunk of, or out of the cab of the truck, they hear her make a noise. Jason says she made kind of a distressed moaning sound, and that's when Jason told Zach that Holly was alive. Zach then tells Jason to go look out, be a lookout, and Jason gets the gun, which was on Shane Austin's side, that I'm assuming at some point Zach took from him between the home and this point, because Shane was not there. It was just Zach and Jason, and that was the gun that he used to shoot Holly in the back of the head. At that point, Jason said he heard a boat, so he runs back to the truck and he sees what happens. He said he immediately became sober. That sobered him up, and he realized the gravity of the situation that just occurred. He tells Zach that it's not safe to bury the body there. They're not in an area that allows guns, so the fact that a gunshot just went off, and he said that it was one gunshot, but due to the fact they were under a bridge, it echoed, and it sounded like 4 gunshots. So they pick Holly Bobo's body back up and put it in the back of the truck, and they go ahead and leave. Now they drive around for a while, and that's when Jason kind of says he wants out of the situation for 2 reasons. One, he realizes what he's gotten himself into. He realizes he has made some pretty poor decisions. And Jason also has a girlfriend named Angela who he has to meet for lunch. He said he usually meets her for lunch in a different county than the one they were in, so he had to hurry and get there so he would, I guess, have an alibi. I don't know why he was so stressed about that, but he wanted to get to her. Zach then takes Jason Autry back to his vehicle. Jason realizes that he does not have enough time to make it to the other county that he needs to be in to meet Angela for lunch. So he texts her the entire lunch break just to kind of keep her in the loop, I guess so he has an alibi. I don't really know why. He was just very adamant that he needed to text her about, or to let her know what was going on. Jason then says that 2 days later, on April the 15th, which was a Friday, he gets another phone call from Zach. Zach tells Jason that they need to meet. Jason assumes that it is about Holly's body again. So he meets Jason at the back of a marathon in Tennessee, in some county in Tennessee. I couldn't find the exact marathon, but he meets them at a marathon behind it in a pine thicket, as how they described it. So they meet in this pine thicket, and Jason says that Zach is alone and Dylan's in the other vehicle. Jason said that Zach came into Jason's vehicle and they sat there and talked. Jason states that the conversation went down something like this. Jason asked Zach, "So what did you do with old girl?" That's how he explained it. That's not my words, that's his words. And Zach said, "We dumped the body." Jason then says something about the body, and Zach ignores him. Zach goes, "That's not what this is about." And Jason is confused. And Zach says, "I need you to kill my brother. He has not slept. He constantly is talking. Something has got to give. He's going to get us all in trouble." And he tells Jason if he will kill his brother, then he will give Jason some of his land and money once his grandfather passes away, because his grandfather is very elderly. So Zach tells Jason, "I need you to kill my brother, and if you do so, I will give you land that I inherit." Jason kind of tells Zach that he wants to sit on it, he wants to think about it, and he's definitely not prepared to do it that day. Zach agrees, and eventually they go their separate ways. Now, Jason decides that he wants to consider it. He calls Zach a couple of days later and asks him if the offer is still on the table, to which Zach says yes. Jason then meets up with Dylan and asks him if he wants to go bass fishing. They get on a boat that belongs to Jason. They drive around drinking, smoking marijuana, and fishing. Jason did not say whether or not he planned on doing anything to Dylan that day, but he did state that they eventually ran into someone who knew Dylan by name on the water, and that also knew Jason's boat. He knew where he got that boat. So Jason backed off dramatically. He knew he was not going to do anything that day. So Jason then says Dylan gets pretty inebriated, and unfortunately, due to just rules of hearsay within the court, Jason's not allowed to explain what was said between he and Dylan. However, Jason does reveal that Dylan mentioned something about the location of where the sexual assault of Holly Bobo took place. So Jason then decided to drive around and go to his grandmother's barn. Now keep in mind that he and Shane Austin are first cousins and share a grandmother. Both grandparents had passed away, and the barn and the home there were completely vacant. It is believed that that barn is the location of the assault. Now, Jason says he went there to clean up but found nothing and left. Jason then says he sees Zach again later on. It doesn't specify when exactly, he doesn't remember a date. However, he does say that he saw Zach and finally was able to ask him, why? Why did this happen? Why did you do this? It is alleged that at that point, Shane Austin, Dylan Adams, and Zach Adams, along with Jason Autry, are together in a vehicle to go and buy drugs. Now, once they get to this location, Shane and Zach get into an argument about Holly and her body. Zach goes on to say, you, Shane, are just as guilty because you assaulted her. That was not his phrasing, but I'm going to keep it at that. Now, we know that Jason was there when Zach allegedly shot Holly and was the lookout. We know that Zach was kind of the mastermind and the one who pulled the trigger. We know that Dylan and Shane both partook in assaulting Holly. Now, we want to know why. Why did they do this? Now, keep in mind that this is alleged. This is he said, she said. Later on, it is denied heavily by the family of Holly, so just keep that in mind. Zach says that the reason he was at Holly's home the morning of April the 13th, 2011, is because he and Dylan were there to teach Clint, Holly's brother, how to make meth. Now, Clint denies this. He says he doesn't know these men, he's never known these men, and the only connection the Bobos have to the Adams family is Karen, Holly, and Clint's mother taught Zach in elementary school. And they, of course, are from a small town, so it's kind of everybody knows everybody. So Zach says he was over at the Bobo residence to teach Clint how to make meth. At that point, Holly came outside and was protesting that, she was not going to allow that to happen. And that's when Zach said that he did what he did. Now, that was Jason's testimony. So that's we're all caught up now. Starting in March of 2014, there were 6 arrests. There were obviously Shane, Jason, Dylan, and Zach, which Dylan technically was already in prison, but he was still affiliated with this case. Now, there were 2 more arrests that were made. The 2 arrests that were made were the Piercy brothers. The Piercy brothers knew someone by the name of Sandra, and Sandra came forward to the police and said, hey, I just want to let you know that there is a video and a photo on the Piercy brothers' phone of Holly Bobo, or a girl who looks like Holly Bobo, tied up and obviously in captivity. There's no proof of this. There's nothing to say that this is true. Again, the Piercy brothers have a very long rap sheet, so it could be potentially true, but we don't know indefinitely if that was Holly. That photo or video was never located, and the Adams brothers, Shane and Jason, never say that did or did not happen. But they were also arrested for withholding evidence, or tampering with evidence, I believe was the official charge. So all of these arrests were made pretty early to mid 2014. Now let's skip to September the 7th of 2014. 2 ginseng hunters were out in the woods of Tennessee. They were, fairly close to the Bobo home, but they were not looking for Holly specifically. They came across what they described as a bucket that was turned over. One of the men picked the bucket up and dumped out its contents. He said that the contents of the bucket were so vile that they made him violently ill. To this day, the police will not allow the men to discuss what was in the bucket. The police have never released that information. There are all kinds of theories, but I'm not even going to get into those because it's very dark and some of them are just not true. A few feet from the bucket was a skull. There were a few other body parts that were found, skeletal remains, and some teeth. 2 hunters called the police and they came immediately. The teeth were taken in, and 2 days later, through dental records, they identified the remains after 3.5 years of Holly Bobo. So there were 6 arrests. We finally have the remains. The family can finally have some closure, you would think at least. But unfortunately, due to media, a very long trial, and a lot of just complete randomness, the family has to wait a very long time before they get the closure that they want. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this video now because I have literally filmed all night long and my makeup has gotten worse and worse and my voice is starting to give out. So I'm gonna stop it here, and part 2 will be up in the next few days. It is going to be about the trial, the media coverage, the aftermath, and the current updates of the Holly Bobo trial. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon. This is Lexie from the future while editing. I just want to say I'm so sorry that my camera angles went all over the place. Unfortunately, I lost my tripod, so I was having to kind of use what I had, and I promise that the quality of the videos, the angles, the camera work, everything will get better over time. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you like it. Please let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the trial first and foremost, but keep it respectful. All disrespect towards the victim or the family or, anything like that will not be tolerated. It will be erased immediately. Also, let me know what you think about the video length. I'm really interested to see if people like longer videos in a series or if you like kind of shorter videos. Personally, I like longer videos because I can plug my phone in while I'm driving and just kind of play it like a podcast. But if you like shorter videos, let me know. I want to, appeal to the audience. So this is a case that I had been studying since it happened, and so I knew I wanted to start with this one. But once we wrap up the Holly Bobo case, I'm excited to take suggestions, and yeah, so go ahead and leave comments. Let me know what you would like to see. The next one that I'm doing is one that is from Alabama, so it's obviously close to home for me, and I'm excited about it. It will probably be long as well. Just go ahead and leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I like to read comments and, start a conversation, and yeah, so go ahead and subscribe and like the video if you want, and I will see you soon. Bye.